For 8 years, I dedicated my life to caring for my mother, who I believed was suffering from Alzheimer's. I abandoned my career and my marriage until the day the nurse caught her counting large sums of money, and we discovered she had been faking the disease the entire time. The private nurse entered the room with a lunch tray on a stuffy Thursday afternoon when the humid summer heat made every movement an unbearable physical torture, and the dense, heavy air seemed to stick to the skin like a second layer of sweat that not even the oscillating fan could relieve, creating an oppressive atmosphere that amplified the feeling of confinement in that room, transformed into an improvised infirmary for so many years that I could no longer remember exactly how it was before being taken over by the characteristic smell of medications, hospital alcohol, and that indefinable fragrance of chronic illness that seemed to have permeated even the walls painted in hospital white. Regina carried the stainless steel tray with the meticulous care of someone who had been trained not to spill a single drop of the thin soup she prepared daily for patients with swallowing difficulties. Her silent steps on the cold ceramic floor echoing minimally in the environment dominated by the monotonous sound of the old air conditioner that fought uselessly against the suffocating heat of early January. When she found my mother sitting on the edge of the hospital bed with side rails that I had purchased for a small fortune, meticulously counting 50 real notes with agile and precise fingers that completely contradicted the tremors and motor incoordination she had pretended to have for endless years. The sound of the notes being manipulated with professional dexterity by fingers that supposedly could no longer hold a spoon by themselves without spilling half the contents echoed through the silent room like machine gun shots methodically destroying 8 years of my life that I had dedicated entirely, obsessively, religiously to the care of a woman who I believed was progressively losing not just her most precious memories, but her very identity, her essence as a person, her ability to recognize the world around her and the people who loved her most, all to a devastating neurological disease that I had researched exhaustively in medical articles, caregiver forums, online support groups, where I shared my daily anguish with other equally destroyed children watching their parents slowly disappear within their own fragmented minds. Regina, the 42-year-old nurse with 20 years of experience in geriatrics and palliative care whom I had hired 3 months ago after interviewing dozens of candidates, paying a salary that consumed almost half of my monthly income because she had demonstrated not only impeccable technical competence, but also a rare combination of infinite patience and genuine compassion for elderly people with dementia, was completely paralyzed at the door of the room, her muscles visibly tensing under the impeccable white uniform, while her professional brown eyes registered every detail of that impossible scene. The tray in her hands began to tremble subtly, the liquid in the soup bowl creating small concentric waves that mirrored the growing tremor of her hands as she watched incredulously as my mother quickly tucked the money back into the imported orthopedic mattress that had cost 3 months of savings, her movements demonstrating fine motor coordination and mental lucidity that violently contradicted every medical diagnosis, every neurological report, every cognitive assessment of the last 8 years that had meticulously documented her supposed progressive and irreversible mental deterioration. Helena, because at that moment she instantly ceased to be my mother and became just Helena, a stranger who wore the familiar face but was fundamentally a different person from the one I thought I knew. Hadn't immediately noticed Regina's presence, continuing to organize the notes in perfectly aligned stacks with the precision of an experienced bank teller, murmuring numbers and performing complex mental calculations that a person with advanced Alzheimer's could never accomplish. "Ms. Helena, what are you doing with all this money?" Regina asked in a professionally cautious voice, but with an underlying tone of incredulity that revealed the shock of an experienced health professional confronted with a medical fraud of unimaginable proportions. And my mother immediately, in a reflex conditioned by years of theatrical practice, let her face empty of all intelligent expression. Her blue eyes that seconds before shone with calculating shrewdness, instantly becoming opaque and confused, her upright posture curving into a perfect imitation of senile fragility that she had cultivated like a method actress who never breaks character. The transformation was so quick, so complete, so perfectly executed that even Regina, with all her professional experience, might have doubted what she had just witnessed if she didn't have the evidence secretly recorded on the small digital recording device, disguised in the decorative brooch she wore on her uniform. A brooch she had started wearing 3 weeks earlier, after noticing disturbing inconsistencies in Helena's behavior when she believed she was alone, small slips that a less observant nurse would have ignored, but that had awakened her professional instincts sharpened by 2 decades of dealing with all types of patients and their peculiarities. "What money, my dear?" I don't know anything. Where is my granddaughter? She promised she would visit me today. Lulu always comes to see me. She's so good to me. My mother responded with that infantilized and trembling voice she had perfected during years of daily practice, each inflection carefully calibrated to awaken maximum compassion and protective instinct in whoever heard it. A vocal performance that included small, strategic tremors, confused pauses in the middle of sentences as if she had forgotten what she was saying, and that slightly tearful tone that suggested a fragile old woman on the verge of tears, completely lost in a world she could no longer understand. But her eyes, oh, her damned eyes, revealed for a fraction of a second a gleam of calculating intelligence, a spark of full consciousness that Regina perfectly captured in the high-definition recording that would completely change my understanding not just of the last 8 years, but of my entire life, of who really was the woman who had given birth to and raised me, of the unimaginable limits of human betrayal when motivated by selfish interests. I was in my old home office. That room that was once my professional sanctuary where I spent hours developing complex accounting strategies for my corporate clients, analyzing financial statements, preparing income tax returns for multinational companies, but which had been gradually transformed into a chaotic storage of medical supplies. Boxes upon boxes of geriatric diapers stacked to the ceiling, packages of special wipes for sensitive skin, bedsore ointments, controlled medications that needed to be stored at room temperature, insulin injection syringes that Helena supposedly needed 3 times a day, physiotherapy equipment we had bought in the vain hope of delaying the physical deterioration that accompanied the mental, and mainly endless piles of prescriptions, medical reports, brain imaging scans that showed what doctors interpreted as progressive cortical atrophy, but that now I suspected belonged to someone else or were somehow manipulated. The phone rang with that strident urgency that always made my heart race, because in recent years each call could be a medical emergency, a crisis with Helena, a fall, an episode of aggression that sometimes accompanied advanced stages of dementia. And when I saw Regina's name on the cell phone screen, something in my stomach tightened in an inexplicable premonition. Luciana, I need you to come home immediately. It's extremely urgent and important. Something about your mother that cannot wait even 1 more hour. Not even 1 more minute, Regina said with a voice that tried to maintain professionalism but couldn't completely hide the tremor of moral indignation, professional outrage, genuine compassion for me mixed with anger about the absurd situation she had discovered. During the last 8 years, since that fateful day when my mother Helena, then 62 years old but looking much older due to what I believed was the weight of the disease, had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's by 3 different neurologists, Dr. Marcos Fernandez, Dr. Carolina Mendez, and Dr. Roberto Almeida, all renowned specialists who based their diagnoses on symptoms that I now understood had been meticulously researched, practiced, and feigned with the precision of an actress preparing for the role of her life. I had systematically, methodically, completely abandoned every aspect of my previous life to dedicate myself to her care. My promising career as a senior accountant at Silvera and Associates, where I was in direct line to become a partner after 15 years of impeccable dedication, had been reduced first to part-time, then to sporadic freelance work that I did in the early hours when Helena finally slept, and eventually completely abandoned when the care became impossible to reconcile with any regular professional commitment. My 12-year marriage to Roberto, which had begun as a modern fairy tale between 2 successful professionals who deeply loved each other and planned to have children once both careers were stabilized, had gradually deteriorated under the crushing weight of having a mother-in-law with dementia living with us, transforming our home into a geriatric hospital where romance died suffocated by the smell of medications and the constant sound of night screams when Helena had her episodes of complete disorientation. And most importantly, more devastating than any material or professional loss, my mental sanity had been progressively, inexorably eroded by constant stress, chronic sleep deprivation, the searing guilt whenever I allowed myself a moment of anger or frustration with the situation, the anticipated grief of watching my mother disappear 1 neuron at a time while her body remained present. When Regina arrived home that fateful afternoon that would divide my life into before and after, carrying her Samsung phone with hands visibly trembling from a complex combination of professional indignation at the medical fraud she had witnessed and genuine compassion for the unnecessary suffering she knew I had endured for almost a decade, I was exhausted in a way that transcended physical tiredness. It was an existential exhaustion, a fatigue of the soul that came from years fighting what I believed to be a noble, but losing battle against a relentless disease. I had spent the entire morning in an epic battle trying to convince Helena to take the extremely expensive Alzheimer's medications, Donepezil, Memantine, Rivastigmine, that I religiously purchased every month even if it meant economizing on my own food, buying only the basics at the supermarket, cutting out all the small luxuries that were once part of my life, canceling the gym, the beauty salon, outings with friends, everything sacrificed on the altar of maternal care that I believed was my sacred duty as an only child. Luciana, you need to sit down immediately and breathe deeply, profoundly, before seeing what I'm going to show you. Because what I discovered will not only change, but destroy and completely rebuild your perception about absolutely everything that happened in the last 8 years of your existence, Regina said, with that professional seriousness that nurses develop after years of dealing with life-or-death situations, but tempered with a genuine personal concern that transcended the employer-employee relationship, gently but firmly guiding me to the living room sofa that had been completely reorganized to accommodate not only the wheelchair imported from Germany that Helena used theatrically whenever there were visitors, medical appointments, or any situation where her performance needed to convince specific audiences, but also the orthopedic walker with silicone wheels, the support bars strategically installed on the walls, the stair lift that had cost a small fortune and that she pretended to have extreme difficulty using, always requiring complete assistance to go up or down the steps of the house where she had lived for decades and knew every inch by heart. The first recording that Regina showed me on the tablet, with surprisingly clear quality for such a small recording device, had been made exactly 2 weeks earlier, on a specific Tuesday afternoon, when I had gone to the pharmacy to buy Helena's monthly medication, a journey that always took at least 3 hours because I needed to go to multiple pharmacies to find all the specific medications, compare prices because every penny saved made a difference in the tight budget, and mainly because I took advantage of these rare outings to breathe a little, sit in a cafe, and try to remember who I was before becoming a full-time caregiver. Helena believed she was completely alone in the house with the nurse, who she presumed was distracted in the kitchen preparing her special dinner. Pureed vegetables beaten to the exact consistency for patients with dysphagia, ground meat processed until it became almost a paste, all without salt because she supposedly had severe hypertension, without sugar because she was also diabetic, without fat because her cholesterol was very high, a bland hospital diet that I believed was necessary to preserve her fragile health. In the video, which began with Helena lying in bed in her usual pose of helpless invalid, she suddenly opened her eyes with complete lucidity, checked if she was really alone by carefully looking at all corners of the room like a criminal verifying the absence of witnesses, and then got up from the hospital bed with impressive agility for someone 70 years old, let alone someone supposedly devastated by advanced dementia. Her movements were fluid, coordinated, purposeful. She walked with firm and quick steps to the antique mahogany wardrobe that had belonged to my grandmother, opened the third drawer from the bottom with surgical precision, removed a stack of old sheets that served as camouflage, and took out a hard, covered black notebook that was hidden in the false bottom that I didn't even know existed. The notebook was thick, obviously used for a long time, with colored markers separating different sections, and when she opened it to a specific page that she found without hesitation, I could see through the recording that it was filled with notes in tiny but perfectly legible handwriting. None of the characteristic Parkinson's tremor that frequently accompanies Alzheimer's. None of the mental disorganization that would make maintaining coherent records impossible. Stupid daughter still falling right into my game like a duckling following the mother duck. 8 years serving me like a submissive slave and still thinks she's doing the great Christian charity taking care of her sick mommy, Helena muttered to herself while writing in the notebook, with a Mont Blanc pen that I had bought for her years before, when I still worked and had money for expensive gifts. A pen that she claimed she could no longer use due to lack of motor coordination, but that now slid across the paper with the fluidity of a professional writer. A few more years maintaining this performance and she'll be so financially broken and emotionally destroyed that she'll have to sell the house to pay for my supposed medical treatments. Then I'll make a miraculous recovery. Perhaps say it was a new experimental medication, or a divine miracle, something dramatic and convincing, and keep all the money left from the sale, plus the inheritance of whatever remains of her assets after years of paying caregivers and doctors. The words recorded in the video penetrated my brain like poisoned needles of devastating comprehension, each syllable methodically destroying 8 years of memories I had built about noble filial sacrifice, about unconditional love that transcends cognitive decline, about the sacred duty to care for those who cared for us. an entire personal mythology about kindness and dedication that had sustained me during thousands of sleepless nights when she screamed for hours pretending absolute terror for not recognizing where she was, calling for her own mother who had died decades ago, begging to go home when she was already home, all those theatrical performances that had shattered my heart night after night, making me cry in despair and helplessness while she secretly must have been laughing at my pathetic naivety. Regina had many more recordings, a meticulous archive of evidence she had compiled during 3 weeks of discreet yet determined professional observation, each video more devastating than the previous one, revealing progressively deeper layers of the elaborate fraud. There was Helena performing complex physical exercises in her room when she thought she was alone. Perfect squats, yoga stretches that required impressive balance and flexibility, even modified push-ups supported on the edge of the bed, all from a woman who supposedly could barely rise from a chair without assistance. Another video showed her reading dense books she kept hidden between the mattress and bed frame, not large print magazines or illustrated books that would be appropriate for someone with compromised cognition, but complex novels, historical biographies, even a financial investment manual with graphs and tables that she analyzed with focused attention, making notes in the margins with that same firm and organized handwriting. But the most revealing video, the one that definitively confirmed the extent and depth of the conspiracy, showed Helena on a cell phone, a modern device she kept hidden and that I didn't even know she possessed since she always claimed she could no longer understand technology. Couldn't remember how to use even the simple landline telephone we kept in her room. She was chatting animatedly with perfect mental clarity, laughing, making sophisticated jokes, discussing current events she had secretly followed on the internet, and primarily instructing her accomplice friends on how to maintain the secret about her lucidity. If Luciana calls asking about me, you have to pretend sadness. Say it's very difficult to see me like this, that I no longer recognize anyone, that I can barely speak coherently, she instructed with the precision of a film director guiding actors. Marlene has been doing this perfectly for years. You need to maintain the same storyline so there are no holes in the narrative. And then there was the most painful of all. Videos of her counting and recounting large amounts of cash she had secretly accumulated over years through an elaborate scheme of diversions. Disability benefits she received from the government based on fraudulent medical reports, retirement due to incapacitating mental illness, various aids from social programs intended for elderly people with dementia. But mainly, and this made me feel violently physically nauseous, money systematically diverted from purchases I made for her. I gave her a credit card for emergencies, transferred money to her account when she claimed to need something specific, always blindly trusting when she said medications had increased in price, that she needed an additional treatment, that the doctor had recommended an expensive supplement. She forged receipts, inflated prices, invented medical expenses, and pocketed the difference, gradually building a substantial secret estate while I sank into debt trying to fund fictitious medical care. During the 8 years of Helena's supposed progressive and devastating disease, I had transformed into an unrecognizable person, a pale and exhausted shadow of the competent, professional, independent woman and loving wife I had been before that fraudulent diagnosis that functioned as a death sentence for all my dreams and ambitions. My current 43 years looked like 60 or more due to chronic stress that had carved deep furrows in my face, painted prematurely gray hair that I no longer had time or money to dye, and especially erased any spark of hope or joy from my eyes that now reflected only exhaustion and resignation. The physical transformation was shocking. I had lost 20 kilos because I often skipped meals to monitor Helena during her supposed crises, because stress had destroyed my appetite, because spending time cooking for myself seemed like an unforgivable luxury when there were so many urgent medical needs to attend to. I had developed severe hypertension, ironically the same condition that Helena pretended to have, but mine was real, caused by years of elevated cortisol, sleepless nights, constant worry that never ceased even for a moment. Roberto, my ex-husband who had been my safe harbor during our first 15 years together, a companion who made me laugh until I cried with his witty observations about the world, who unconditionally supported me in all professional decisions, who dreamed of having 3 children with me and a house full of joy and childish chaos, had heroically tried to resist during the first 3 years of the hell fabricated by Helena. He would wake up with me during the fake night crises, hold me while I cried in frustration, tried to convince me to consider a specialized nursing home when it became obvious that caregiving was destroying me, but eventually, inevitably, he could no longer bear living in a house that had transformed into a geriatric hospital, where every room smelled of hospital disinfectant and medications, where we could no longer make love without being interrupted by Helena's fake screams, where every conversation revolved around symptoms, medications, medical appointments, grim prognoses. Luciana, I love you more than words can express. You are the woman of my life, my soulmate, my best friend. But I can't live like this anymore, Roberto had said on that fateful December night 3 years ago, tears running down his face as he closed his last suitcase. Your mother is consuming not only you, but our life together, our marriage, our dreams of having children. How can we bring children into this environment? I feel guilty saying this, but sometimes I wish she would that this would end soon, so you could live your life again. He left that night while Helena staged a particularly dramatic and elaborate crisis, screaming that there were strange men in the room wanting to hurt her, trying to flee the house in fake panic, scratching me when I tried to gently restrain her. An Oscar-worthy performance that she must have specifically planned to ensure Roberto wouldn't change his mind. The most painful revelation among all the meticulously collected recordings by Regina was a video from just 3 days before, captured with crystal clarity by the strategically positioned recording device, where Helena was talking on the phone with her sister Marlene, my aunt who lived in another state and who I firmly believed was also suffering deeply from her sister's progressive mental deterioration, sharing with me the pain of seeing a loved one gradually disappear into the impenetrable fog of dementia. The conversation, however, revealed a reality radically different and infinitely more sinister than I could have imagined in my most paranoid nightmares. Marlene, you can't imagine how pathetically easy it is to deceive Luciana. She is so desperately dedicated, so consumed by Catholic guilt, and the need to be the perfect daughter that she absolutely accepts anything I invent, any symptom I pretend to have, any crisis I stage. Helena was saying between discreet but genuine laughs while eating imported Belgian chocolates that she had purchased online using credit cards she kept hidden in secret compartments that I had never discovered in 8 years living in the same house. Yesterday, I executed one of my best performances. I pretended not to recognize her face for 2 whole hours, looking at her with absolute terror as if she were a strange invader, screaming for her to leave my house, begging them to call my real daughter, and she cried so much with such genuine anguish that for a brief moment I almost felt sorry. Almost. But then I remembered that children exist exactly for this, to serve parents unconditionally, not the other way around as this ridiculously spoiled modern generation believes. The casual cruelty of these words, the complete absence of maternal remorse or compassion, the calculating coldness with which she described my suffering as personal entertainment, all this created such violent cognitive dissonance that my brain initially refused to process the information. As if I were watching a movie about someone else's life, not discovering the truth about my own mother. Marlene, from what I could understand through the fragments of conversation captured, was not merely a passive listener to Helena's criminal confessions, but an active and enthusiastic accomplice in the elaborate scheme, a co-conspirator who offered practical suggestions on how to make the fraud even more convincing and profitable. Helena, you need to start worsening the symptoms gradually but consistently. Create a believable progression that doctors would expect to see, Marlene advised with disturbing expertise that suggested familiarity with medical fraud. Start forgetting to eat on your own. Pretend occasional incontinence. I know it's unpleasant, but think about the return on investment. This way, Luciana will have to hire more nurses, more caregivers, and you can easily divert 30–40% of this money from medical care without raising suspicions. The business-like coldness with which they discussed my systematic exploitation, as if they were planning a business strategy instead of a devastating family betrayal, revealed a level of sociopathy that I had never suspected existed in my family. And don't forget to make that scene of desperate crying and complete disorientation when Dr. Marcos comes for the next home consultation next week, Marlene continued her Machiavellian instructions. Doctors love to confirm their previous diagnoses. It makes them feel competent and insightful. If you give the right performance, he'll probably increase the medication doses, maybe prescribe some new and more expensive ones that you can sell later on the black market. There are many people who need these medications and can't afford the pharmacy price. It's practically a social service you're providing. The cynicism of this observation, transforming crime into virtue through distorted mental gymnastics, demonstrated how people can rationalize any atrocity when motivated by greed and devoid of basic empathy. Regina observed my reactions with genuine professional concern as I processed each devastating revelation, my face probably showing the internal emotional collapse in real time. the initial denial being progressively replaced by anger, then by a sadness so deep that it felt physical, a pain in my chest that radiated to all limbs as if my heart were literally breaking into irregular pieces. Luciana, I know this is absolutely devastating. I know it seems impossible to process, but you urgently needed to know the truth, she said, holding my hand with professional firmness, tempered by genuine human compassion. As a health professional with 20 years of experience, I couldn't continue being an unwitting accomplice to this monstrous medical fraud and systematic emotional abuse. Your mother doesn't have Alzheimer's. She never even had the first signs. All the tests showing brain alterations can be easily manipulated if the patient knows exactly what to do and say during neurological assessments, and Helena clearly studied the disease with the detail of a doctor preparing for a specialization. The confrontation with Helena that same night was simultaneously the most difficult and most liberating moment of my adult life. An experience that forced me to face not only her monstrous and unforgivable betrayal, but also my own pathological naivety, my unhealthy need for maternal approval, myself. Destructive compulsion to be a perfect daughter even when it meant literally sacrificing every aspect of my own existence. I entered her room carrying Regina's cell phone with all the recordings, my heart beating so violently that I could feel the pulsations not only in my throat but throughout my body, a primitive confrontational adrenaline running through my veins as if I were about to face a deadly predator, which in a sense was exactly what was happening. Helena was lying in bed in her usual pose as a defenseless victim of Alzheimer's, empty eyes staring unfocused at the ceiling, murmuring disconnected words about people dead for decades, moving her fingers as if invisibly knitting, the entire theatrical repertoire she had perfected during 8 years of uninterrupted performance. Mom, I know you understand perfectly well every word I'm saying, so you can immediately stop this ridiculous and pathetic performance because the show is definitely over. The curtain has fallen, the spotlights have gone out, the audience has left, I said with a firmness in my voice that completely surprised me, considering that my legs were shaking so much I had to lean against the wall to avoid falling, and my vision was blurred by tears that I refused to let fall because she didn't deserve to see me cry ever again. Helena maintained the act for a few more endless seconds, her eyes remaining empty, her mouth moving without producing coherent words. But when I started playing the crystal-clear audio of her conversation with Marlene, specifically the part where she called me idiot daughter and described my suffering as entertainment, her eyes suddenly focused on me with a clarity and malice that definitively, unequivocally, irrefutably confirmed that I had been the victim of one of the most cruel and elaborate family manipulations in the history of maternal sociopathy. "So, you finally found out," she said instantly, completely abandoning the character of the mentally ill person without any attempt at transition, revealing the calculating, cold, and fundamentally cruel woman who had hidden behind the mask of an Alzheimer's victim during almost a decade of systematic psychological torture. Her voice completely lost the weak, trembling, and confused tone that I had become accustomed to hearing during thousands of days and nights, revealing a strong, clear, and authoritative quality that instantly transported me to my childhood, when she manipulated me through elaborate guilt, sophisticated emotional blackmail, and a complex system of psychological punishments and rewards that had programmed me since birth to be a source of narcissistic supply for her vampiric emotional needs. So what if you found out? What exactly are you going to do now? Report your own mother to the authorities? Send a 70-year-old elderly woman to jail? The entire society will publicly crucify you as the most ungrateful and unnatural daughter that ever existed, the woman who abandoned her own sick mother because of money. The titanic audacity and cynicism of these words hit me like consecutive punches to the stomach. Each phrase an additional assault on my already fragmented understanding of reality. But paradoxically, they also awakened a fury that had been dormant, suppressed, denied under layers upon layers of manufactured guilt and distorted filial duty. It was a clean, pure, justified anger, the sacred fury of someone who finally understands the complete extent of how they were used, abused, exploited, and discarded by the person who should have protected them above all. You systematically destroyed my life. Every aspect, every dream, every relationship, every opportunity, I shouted. 8 years of repressed frustration and accumulated exhaustion exploding in a single sentence that reverberated through the walls of the room like a primal war cry. I lost my marriage to a man who genuinely loved me because you turned our home into an asylum. I lost my career that I had built with blood, sweat, and tears over 15 years because you convinced me that taking care of you was more important than my own life. I lost my physical health that I will never fully recover, my mental health that will need years of therapy to rebuild, my youth that I wasted serving a lie. How could you? How could any human being be capable of watching their own daughter progressively destroying herself day after day, year after year, and not only continue with this monstrous farce but find sadistic pleasure in it? Because I could, and because you allowed it? Helena responded with an Antarctic coldness that finally made me understand that I was dealing with someone fundamentally different from a normal mother, someone for whom concepts like maternal love, protection of children, sacrifice for descendants were completely alien, incomprehensible, irrelevant. You've always been a sentimental idiot since childhood, Luciana. Always desperately needing approval, always ready to sacrifice yourself for others to feel valued, always looking for external validation because you never developed an internal sense of self-worth. I merely used your obvious psychological weaknesses to my advantage, exactly as any intelligent predator would do with vulnerable prey. It's not personal, it's simply nature. The strong exploit the weak. The clever manipulate the naive. The merciless dominate the sentimental. It was in that specific moment, hearing my own mother compare me to prey and herself to a predator, admitting without shame or remorse that she had consciously exploited what she perceived as weaknesses, but which were actually human qualities like compassion, loyalty, and love, that something fundamental broke inside me. But it wasn't a destructive break as one might expect. It was a liberating break, like invisible but heavy chains being shattered, like a psychological prison built over decades being demolished, allowing me to finally see reality without the distorted filters of programmed family obligation and manufactured guilt that had governed every decision of my adult life. Helena wasn't a victim of degenerative neurological disease desperately needing my care. She was an emotional predator, a psychological parasite who had used her own daughter as a personal slave through the cruelest and most elaborate manipulations possible. Regina, please come here immediately and bring your cell phone and any recording devices you have to document all of this, I called out loudly. And Helena, for the first time since she had abandoned her performance, showed genuine fear in her eyes upon realizing that I was no longer under her psychological control, that the puppet strings had been definitively cut, that her theater of horrors had come to an end. Regina entered the room with her cell phone camera already recording in high definition, capturing the exact moment when Helena desperately, pathetically tried to resume her sick person performance, closing her eyes and letting her jaw drop slightly, mumbling about not understanding what was happening. But it was too late. Her mask had completely fallen, her true face had been revealed, and there was no theatrical makeup in the world that could hide again the monster that had always been there. From today, from this exact moment recorded on video by witnesses, you are no longer my legal, moral, emotional responsibility or of any other nature, I declared, feeling each word as a progressive liberation from years of invisible but devastatingly real psychological imprisonment, as if each syllable was cutting one of the thousands of strings that Helena had tied around me during decades of systematic manipulation. I will deliver absolutely all these recordings to the competent authorities, the civil police, the public prosecutor's office, the Social Security you systematically defrauded for years by stealing benefits intended for genuinely sick people, all the doctors you deceived with your elaborate theatrical performances, the hospitals where you wasted precious resources that could have saved real lives, and especially I will criminally prosecute you for fraud, emotional swindling, ideological falsehood, criminal association with Marlene, and absolutely all the crimes that my lawyers can identify in this macabre and sociopathic 8-year performance of yours. Helena tried to get up from the bed with an agility that would have been impossible for someone with advanced Alzheimer's, definitively revealing her complete physical capability by quickly jumping up and trying to snatch the cell phone from Regina's hands with a strength and coordination that violently contradicted years of feigned senile frailty. Regina, however, was younger, stronger, and mainly was prepared for this reaction, keeping the device firmly out of Helena's reach while continuing to record the surreal scene of a supposed patient with severe dementia, demonstrating athlete-like reflexes, complex strategic thinking, and a narcissistic fury of a cornered predator. You can't do this to me. I am your mother. I carried you in my womb for 9 months, gave you life, breastfed you, changed your diapers, cared for you when you were sick, raised you, educated you, sacrificed my youth for you. You owe me respect, obedience, and unconditional care until the day I die, Helena screamed, finally revealing her true narcissistic and exploitative nature without any filter or disguise, the loving maternal mask completely destroyed to reveal the monster that had always been there. No, Helena, because you are no longer my mother. You're just Helena now. I owe absolutely nothing to you beyond what any citizen owes to another before the law. Dignified treatment based on reciprocity and mutual respect. Things that you completely, irrevocably, definitively destroyed with your systematic lies, your calculated exploitation, your sadistic cruelty disguised as illness. I responded, purposefully using her proper name instead of mother to symbolically, verbally, emotionally establish the new dynamic of our non-relationship. You had 8 years stolen from my life through fraud and manipulation. You won't have one more day. Not one more hour, not even one more minute. The legal and social consequences of Helena's elaborate fraud revelation were extensive, complex, and reverberated through our entire extended family like an emotional earthquake that destroyed relationships, exposed hidden complicities, and forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about family loyalty versus moral justice. The criminal investigation initiated after my formal complaint at the police station progressively revealed a network of complicity that included not only Marlene as an active accomplice, but also other relatives who knew or strongly suspected the farce, but chose to remain in cowardly silence, either out of fear of confrontation, indirect personal benefit, or simply indifference to my suffering. The criminal case against Helena advanced with surprising speed after I presented Regina's devastating recordings as irrefutable evidence, along with emotional testimonies from healthcare professionals who began to retrospectively reassess all the inconsistencies in her behavior that had been ignored, rationalized, or misinterpreted during years of consultations. Dr. Marcos Fernandez, the respected 57-year-old neurologist with 3 decades of clinical experience, who had been Helena's primary physician for the past 5 years, was deeply, genuinely shaken upon discovering he had been masterfully deceived by a patient who had meticulously studied Alzheimer's symptoms with the dedication of a medical student preparing for residency exams. During his official testimony for the investigation, he displayed a complex mixture of professional outrage, personal humiliation, and mainly genuine concern about how many other patients might be executing similar frauds without detection. In 30 years of specialized neurological practice, having diagnosed and treated hundreds of patients with genuine dementia, I had never encountered a case of simulation so elaborate, consistent, and sustained for so long, he admitted with a choked voice during his official recorded testimony. Ms. Helena demonstrated encyclopedic knowledge about the typical symptomatic progression of Alzheimer's disease, reproducing with pinpoint precision even subtle signs that only highly specialized professionals would know. The specific way genuine patients fail clock tests, the typical progression of aphasia, sundowning patterns, even characteristic facial micro-expressions. She must have studied not only popular medical literature, but specialized journals, videos of real patients, perhaps even attended medical lectures in disguise. The level of preparation and dedication to maintain this fraud is, paradoxically, impressive in its sociopathy. The parallel financial investigation revealed that Helena had accumulated, through her elaborate fraudulent schemes, more than 300,000 reais during the 8 years of her completely fictitious illness. The money came from multiple converging criminal sources: fraudulent government benefits obtained through falsified medical documentation, mental disability retirement she didn't deserve, various aids from social programs meant for genuinely ill elderly people who went without resources because of parasites like her, systematic sales of expensive medications that she obtained through prescriptions but never took, and mainly constant diversions of the funds I religiously transferred for her medical care. She had created a secret bank account at another bank where she accumulated these criminal resources, using false documents and partially altered identity, meticulously planning to use the money to live comfortably after revealing a miraculous recovery she planned to stage when I was completely financially broken, emotionally destroyed, and psychologically unable to question the convenient medical miracle. Marlene, when finally confronted with irrefutable evidence of her active participation in the fraud through recordings of conspiratorial telephone conversations, initially tried to deny any knowledge of the farce with the same theatrical conviction she had learned from her sister. I would never imagine Helena was pretending. I always believed she was genuinely ill. If I said anything in the calls that could be misinterpreted, it was only because I was trying to cheer her up in her terrible illness, she declared with fake tears that convinced no one. But when confronted with specific recordings where she gave detailed instructions on how to improve the fraud, Suggesting specific symptoms to fake and methods to divert money, her defense progressively crumbled until the reluctant confession. Luciana has always been a foolish and overly sentimental girl, even as a child. Helena was just taking advantage of her naive nature. It's not a crime to be smarter than other family members. Marlene had the sociopathic audacity to say during the official police interrogation, as if exploiting someone's kindness and dedication was not only acceptable, but admirable, revealing a moral rot that apparently ran in the maternal lineage of the family. The devastating psychological impact of discovering that I had wasted almost a decade of my life, my most professionally productive years, my last realistic chance to have children, my marriage to a man who genuinely loved me, all sacrificed to care for a completely non-existent illness, created a trauma that no amount of therapy could completely erase, only helped to process and integrate in a less destructive way. With the specialized professional support of Dr. Ana Carolina Mendez, a psychologist with 20 years of specific experience in family trauma and narcissistic abuse who had written books on the subject, I began the long, painful, but necessary process of reconstructing my fragmented identity and destroyed self-esteem that had been systematically demolished by maternal manipulation, not just during the 8 years of active fraud, but retroactively I now understood, throughout my entire life since childhood. Luciana, you are a victim of a particularly cruel and elaborate form of psychological abuse called medical gaslighting, where the aggressor uses completely false health conditions to control, manipulate, and psychologically enslave the victim. Dr. Ana Carolina explained during our intensive therapy sessions that happened 3 times a week and lasted 2 hours each, diving deeply into the trauma in order to eventually emerge from the other side. But it's crucial to understand that this specific abuse of the last 8 years was just the most extreme manifestation of a pattern of narcissistic abuse that probably began in your childhood. Helena programmed you from infancy to be her source of narcissistic supply, to exist only to serve her, to derive your self-worth only through sacrifice for her. The fake illness was just the final, most efficient tool to ensure your total slavery. Roberto, my ex-husband who had tried to maintain sporadic contact through polite but distant messages in the years following our separation, when he learned of the devastating truth through mutual friends who had read about the case in local media, because the story had become news due to the unusual and prolonged nature of the fraud, tried to reach out to me personally to offer emotional support, and surprisingly, even cautiously suggested the possibility of trying to rebuild our destroyed relationship. We met for coffee on a rainy Saturday afternoon, 6 months after the fraud revelation, at a discreet cafe downtown where we used to go during our courtship 15 years earlier, when we were young professionals full of dreams and plans that didn't include the nightmare that Helena would create in our lives. Luciana, I deeply, viscerally feel for everything you went through alone after I left, he said, his green eyes showing genuine regret mixed with relief for having escaped before discovering the truth. If I had minimally suspected, if I had noticed any sign that Helena was faking, perhaps we could have discovered earlier. Perhaps our marriage would have survived. Perhaps. His voice trailed off into possibilities that would never materialize. But I had learned through the devastating traumatic experience that some damage is irreversible, that lost time cannot be recovered no matter how much we wish it, that certain chapters of life need to be definitively closed with melancholic but necessary acceptance so that new ones can begin without the weight of futile resurrection attempts. Roberto, I genuinely appreciate your concern and your support now. It means a lot to know that you don't blame me for everything that happened, I replied, briefly holding his hand across the table before definitively releasing it. But we are both fundamentally different people now. You've built a new life over the past 3 years, probably have someone special, perhaps the children we always dreamed of. I need to rebuild my identity from scratch, learn who I am without Helena, without the caregiver role, without you. We must accept that our chapter has ended, not with anger or resentment, but with gratitude for what was good while it lasted. Financial recovery was another monumental challenge that initially seemed insurmountable. Considering that I had gone years without working formally in the increasingly competitive accounting market, my career had been completely interrupted exactly at the peak of my professional development, when I was about to become a partner, and mainly because the market had evolved significantly during my absence with new regulations, software, methodologies that I no longer mastered. At 43, an age when most professionals are consolidating their careers and reaping the fruits of decades of investment, I had to start practically from scratch as if I were a recent graduate, but without the energy of youth or patience for corporate politics. These were humiliating months of evening refresher courses where I was the oldest student in the class, recovering expired professional certifications through exams that I had easily passed 20 years before, but now required intensive study, and mainly rebuilding from nothing a network of professional contacts that had been completely abandoned during my years as a full-time caregiver. Marina Rodriguez, a professional colleague who had maintained sporadic contact through Christmas and birthday messages during my years of absence from the market, demonstrated a rare professional generosity by offering me an opportunity to work at her successful accounting firm as a way to restart my career. Marina had built a modest but solid empire of accounting consultancy during the years I was caring for Helena, and now led a team of 15 accountants in a modern office in the financial district. Luciana, I followed your family drama from afar through the few times we talked, and I always admired your dedication, even though we now know it was tragically misdirected, she said during the interview. That was more a conversation between old friends than a formal selection process. Someone with your iron determination and proven capacity for extreme sacrifice, when properly directed toward valid goals, can achieve absolutely anything professionally. You'll start in a junior position due to your time away from the market, but I guarantee that in 2 years, you'll be managing your own team if you maintain the focus you demonstrated, even if in the wrong circumstances in recent years. Helena's criminal trial attracted significant attention from local and even national media due to the unusual, prolonged, and cruel nature of the fraud, transforming our private family drama into a public discussion about the ethical limits of filial obligation, the specific vulnerability of family caregivers to emotional manipulation, and especially about the urgent need for more rigorous verification mechanisms for disability benefits that were being exploited by fraudsters. Sensationalist reports detailed how an elderly woman had faked a devastating degenerative disease for almost a decade to psychologically enslave her own daughter, generating heated debates on television programs, crime podcasts, online forums where people shared similar stories of family exploitation that had never been exposed. The media circus was an additional violation of my already shattered privacy, but paradoxically also brought public validation that I had been a genuine victim of an elaborate crime, not a negligent or paranoid daughter as Helena tried to portray in her public statements through her lawyer. During the trial that lasted 3 tense weekly sessions for 3 months, Helena maintained a defiant, arrogant, and completely remorseless posture that shocked even experienced legal professionals accustomed to the dark nature of human criminality. She appeared in court always impeccably dressed in clothes that I had bought for her during the years of supposed illness, a cruel irony that did not go unnoticed, and held her head high with unshakable narcissistic pride while the evidence of her crimes was methodically presented. Her defense arguments, articulated through a public defender who clearly despised having to defend her but did so out of professional obligation, centered on the absurd distortion that children must care for parents unconditionally, regardless of circumstances, and that she had merely tested the depth of her daughter's love through an elaborate social experiment. Arguments that were summarily rejected by Judge Dr. Carlos Eduardo Silveira, a 62-year-old magistrate with 40 years of experience who had seen all kinds of creative justifications for crimes, but was visibly disturbed by Helena's coldness. By the facts unequivocally established during this process, it has been demonstrated beyond any reasonable doubt that the defendant Helena Silva Santos participated consciously, deliberately and sadistically in a systematic fraudulent scheme for a period of 8 years, the judge declared in his sentence, his deep voice reverberating through the courtroom packed with journalists, curious onlookers, and some people who claim to have experienced similar situations. What makes this crime particularly heinous is not only the financial aspect of the fraud, estimated at 300,000 Rs in undue benefits and embezzlement, but mainly the severe and continuous psychological abuse, exponentially aggravated by the family bond that should represent protection, love, and care, not exploitation, manipulation, and slavery. The defendant transformed the victim's filial love into a weapon of psychological torture, exploiting the best human instincts for the worst possible ends. The sentence of 5 years in prison in an initially closed regime for Helena, in addition to the obligation to return all fraudulently received benefits with monetary correction and interest, was received by her with the same calculating coldness that had characterized her entire criminal performance for 8 years. "You will bitterly regret this for the rest of your miserable life, Luciana," were her last words to me before being taken away in handcuffs to serve her sentence, her voice distilling pure venom without any trace of the maternal love that should exist even in the worst circumstances. A daughter who denounces and sends her own mother to prison is cursed by all the forces of the universe, will die alone and abandoned like an ownerless dog. But her curses and threats no longer had any power over me. I had learned in the most painful way possible that true evil does not come from supernatural curses or cosmic forces, but from real people of flesh and blood who consciously choose to harm those who trust them most, using love and duty as weapons of manipulation and control. Regina, the brave nurse who had risked her professional license by recording Helena without formal authorization, because technically this could be considered a violation of patient privacy, even if the patient was a fraudster, became not only a crucial witness in the process that ensured the conviction, but also a dear friend who helped me navigate through the turbulent months after the revelation. Luciana, you know that when I began to suspect and installed the recording device, I pondered a lot about the ethical and legal implications. She confessed to me months later during a dinner where we were celebrating small victories in my gradual recovery. But seeing you destroying yourself day after day, serving as a slave to someone who was consciously exploiting you, my professional and human conscience did not allow me to continue being a passive witness to an ongoing crime. You deserve to live your own life fully, not the distorted life that others determine for you through emotional manipulation. Intensive therapy with Dr. Anna Carolina continued to be fundamental for more than 2 years, helping me to process not only the specific trauma of the 8 lost years, but mainly the deeply rooted behavioral patterns since childhood that had made me vulnerable to Helena's manipulation. Your mother cultivated in you since infancy a pathological need for external approval, especially hers, and a completely distorted sense of filial duty that exceeded any healthy limit. The psychologist patiently explained, as we worked through painful childhood memories that now made sense under a new perspective. She systematically programmed you to be her extension, not an independent person. The work now is to deprogram decades of conditioning and rebuild your identity based on your own authentic values and legitimate needs, not on the parasitic and manipulative expectations of others. I discovered through the thorough police investigation that extended for months that Helena had begun to meticulously plan her elaborate fraud years before executing it, with a premeditation that revealed levels of sociopathy that even experienced investigators had not frequently encountered. The detectives found on her personal computer, which she claimed not to know how to use due to the mental confusion of Alzheimer's, extensive browsing histories showing obsessive searches about dementia symptoms, videos of real patients that she studied like an actress preparing for a role, downloads of specialized medical articles on differential diagnosis of dementias, and most importantly, active participation in obscure online forums where people exchanged information about how to simulate illnesses to obtain benefits. She had even taken online courses about Alzheimer's disease supposedly to better understand what might happen to her in old age, but which in reality were meticulous preparation for the criminal performance she would execute perfectly for 8 interminable years. The frightening level of premeditation and calculation involved made it absolutely impossible to accept any narrative that she had been a victim of circumstances, a moment of weakness, or even the influence of third parties. Although Marlene was certainly an accomplice, Helena had been the principal architect of this elaborate crime against her own daughter. There were records that she practiced specific facial expressions of dementia in the mirror, recorded herself pretending to be confused to later analyze and perfect the performance, kept detailed diaries about which symptoms to fake at which moments to create a believable progression of the disease that would convince specialized doctors. It was a crime executed with the precision of a surgeon and the perverse creativity of a psychological horror screenwriter. 2 years after the devastating revelation and Helena's criminal conviction, I finally managed to rebuild a life that, although permanently marked by the traumatic experience like a deep psychological scar, was genuinely mine for the first time in decades, free from toxic family manipulations, from distorted obligations, from manufactured guilt. I returned to my accounting career with renewed vigor and iron determination, initially working in positions that were technically below my experience and age, but quickly demonstrating exceptional competence that allowed me to recover lost ground in record time. Marina had been correct in her prediction. In exactly 2 years, I was managing my own team of 5 junior accountants, bringing to the office not only technical expertise, but also emotional maturity forged in the fire of extreme adversity that made me an exceptionally empathetic and effective leader. I established inflexible, healthy boundaries in all my new relationships, developing what Dr. Anna Carolina called an acute radar for manipulators, a sharpened ability to identify red flags in behaviors that I would have previously ignored or rationalized. I learned to say no without feeling paralyzing guilt, to prioritize my own needs without considering them selfish, to question motivations behind requests that seem to appeal excessively to emotions, and especially to trust my instincts when something seemed too wrong to ignore. It was as if the 8 years of extreme manipulation had functioned as a painful but effective psychological vaccine against future attempts at emotional exploitation. The modern apartment where I now live, purchased with the money from the bank's compensation and located in a tranquil, tree-lined neighborhood completely different from where I lived my nightmare, has absolutely no hospital equipment, no medicinal smell, no physical trace of the lost years as a caregiver for an imaginary illness. I decorated each room with vibrant colors that Helena would hate. She always insisted on calming, neutral tones that I now understand were part of the depressive atmosphere she cultivated, modern furniture that I chose based solely on my personal taste, abstract art on the walls that inspires me, living plants in every window bringing constant life and renewal. It is a space that screams independence, self-determination, rebirth after trauma. Each object a silent declaration that I survived and thrived despite everything. I received a single letter from Helena from prison exactly 1 year after her conviction, written on prison system letterhead with that perfectly legible handwriting she had hidden for 8 years pretending to have tremors. I didn't open the envelope. I didn't dramatically burn it as in movies. I simply handed it sealed to my lawyer, Dr. Paulo Mendez, unrelated to the psychologist, to be filed as evidence in case she attempted any future legal action. He informed me months later, when I asked out of clinical and not emotional curiosity, that the letter contained 3 pages of elaborate manipulations alternating between self-pity, accusations of ingratitude, veiled threats about karma and divine justice, and attempts to awaken nostalgia by mentioning specific childhood memories. Textbook narcissistic manipulation, he had professionally classified, confirming that my decision not to read it had been correct. Dr. Marcos Fernandez, the neurologist who had been involuntarily deceived by Helena's performance, published an important academic article about the case in the Brazilian Journal of Neurology, transforming his humiliating experience into valuable knowledge for the medical community. The article, titled Sustained Simulation of Dementia, Lessons from an 8-Year Medical Fraud Case, detailed the subtle signs he had missed or misinterpreted, created a more rigorous verification protocol for suspicious cases, and mainly warned about the specific vulnerability of doctors to patients who deeply study the diseases they intend to simulate. Helena S.'s case humbly teaches us that we need to balance medical compassion with constant professional vigilance, especially when significant financial benefits are involved in the diagnosis. He wrote, transforming professional failure into scientific advancement. My story inadvertently became a beacon of hope and warning for other people in similar situations who didn't even know they were being exploited. I began regularly participating in support groups for family caregivers, no longer as someone needing help, but as a facilitator sharing warning signs about possible manipulations and the crucial importance of maintaining healthy skepticism, even with close family members. Genuine family love never demands total sacrifice of your identity, never requires you to cease existing as an independent person. I always emphasize at the weekly meetings that take place at the community center. We have not only the right but the duty to protect our own life, health, and mental sanity, even if that means confronting or definitively distancing ourselves from family members who prove to be toxic or exploitative. Today, at 45, I look at the 8 stolen years not just as time wasted and unnecessary suffering, but paradoxically as a brutal yet transformative education about human nature in its extremes, about the mortal dangers of blind trust, about the vital importance of establishing and maintaining healthy boundaries in absolutely all relationships, and especially about my own extraordinary resilience that allowed me not only to survive, but eventually thrive after such profound trauma. The woman who is concluding this account is fundamentally, irreversibly different from that dedicated but naive daughter, who believed for almost a decade that she was nobly caring for a mother with progressive Alzheimer's. I am substantially stronger psychologically, infinitely wiser about relational dynamics, definitely more cynical about human nature, but paradoxically more capable of forming genuine connections, because I now know how to distinguish with surgical precision between real love and disguised manipulation. The phrase that became my personal mantra and that I share with all who have gone through similar family betrayals was said by Dr. Ana Carolina during one of our last sessions. Luciana, you didn't lose 8 years caring for a non-existent sick mother. You survived 8 years of systematic and elaborate psychological abuse disguised as illness. and the fact that you are here today, rebuilt and thriving, is testimony not to your past naivety, but to your extraordinary resilience and human capacity for rebirth after extreme trauma. These words sustain me on the occasional days when the magnitude of lost time still threatens to consume me in sterile bitterness, reminding me that survivors are not defined by the trauma they suffered, but by the courage to rebuild after destruction. Helena may have given me life biologically 45 years ago through a childbirth that she emphasized for decades, but it was Regina who truly gave me back that life by courageously exposing the truth 2 years ago. And this time, the second life that I am living with authenticity and purpose. This life is completely, integrally, and exclusively mine. Without ties, without manipulations, without false obligations, just conscious choices based on genuine values and healthy reciprocal relationships. Freedom has a high price, sometimes very high, but it is worth every tear shed in the process of conquering it. Did you enjoy Luciana's story? Then subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you here on the screen. Click there. I'll be waiting for you.